Okay, so again, hi everyone. My name is Marcia Nedland. I am a consultant, but I'm also the coordinator for the National Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. And so let's go ahead and get started. Our topic today is it time for permanently affordable housing in middle neighborhoods? Um, Obviously, we have panelists today who are going to say for them, it turned out that yes, indeed, it's time that they took on that cause. And they're going to explain to us how they knew it was time and what they're doing about it. But let me open up with a couple of slides just to set the table. If you don't know us already, the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is fairly new, like 7 or 8 year old initiative that is largely volunteer run. It's came out of a small group of people who happened to realize that we were all noticing that if you check the long-term trends in some middle neighborhoods, that they were either on a crash course with further decline and about to become much more troubled neighborhoods, or they were gentrifying out of affordability altogether. And because they were in the middle, nobody was really paying that much attention to them. So, there wasn't a lot of policy around them. There isn't a lot of philanthropy happening around them and that sort of thing, research. So that's the job of the initiative, is to raise awareness about that and basically to get people to focus in on their middles and take a look at what's happening so that if needed, you can craft some policy and strategy around maintaining middle neighborhoods. Is that, that important part of cities and smaller communities where people buy their first homes and, sort of just live their lives and participate in the fabric of community. This venture is largely sort of, in terms of organizational hosts, it's coordinated in a partnership by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. There's a steering committee of about 20 people who are a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And we do have a website that has a lot of the resources that we'll talk about today. It's middleneighborhoods.org. So what is a middle neighborhood? It doesn't have a hard and fast set of numeric metrics, but it is the neighborhoods, if you think about your community, that are neither your most distressed neighborhoods, nor are they your healthiest neighborhoods. They're just sort of hanging out there in the middle. Nationally, they tend to be mostly single family home neighborhoods that were built for families with children. It's one of the problems because that's a declining demographic overall. They still tend to be well more than 50% owner occupied. But again, if you check long-term trends, probably that's eroding. The housing stock is aging. It's still, if you're driving by at 30 miles an hour, it looks like it's an acceptable condition. One of the problems has been that it tends to, in weaker markets, it becomes a problem in competing for home buyers because it lacks certain features and updates that people are expecting right now. We see a lot of middle neighborhoods that have a problem with their 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes or anything that has 1 bathroom. And one of the things we figured out is that middle neighborhoods tend to be more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower income or higher income counterparts. Our cause for concern, I think I've kind of said that, we've noticed that they're faltering. If they're in weak markets, then all of these things are a problem. They're getting more investors that are not your best investors, lots of turnover, hard to attract a new replacement owner occupant. For local governments, when they check the portion of their real estate tax revenue that comes from these neighborhoods and project out the trend on them, and in some cases, they're finding that it's going to become a real problem in terms of the structural funding of the city. So all of these things are potential problems in decline. Then in our next slide, we're also noticing, this is probably what more of you are here to talk about, is that more and more middle neighborhoods are facing gentrification and displacement with this crazy ride we've been on since COVID of escalating property values at the same time that we have a whole investor class that is buying up so much more of our neighborhoods than we're used to. We're starting to lose community control over what happens in the neighborhood and what the norms of behavior are. We're starting to not have affordable opportunities anymore for first-time home buyers. And, you know, all of those things that used to happen in just really a very select few neighborhoods that has some pretty unique characteristics that would make them ripe for gentrification. We're seeing just that category expand significantly. So today, one more thing, if you're curious about where your middle neighborhoods are, we do have a mapping tool at middleneighborhoods.org. It's kind of a blunt instrument because it uses income only as a way to sort neighborhoods, but it is usually the place where people first start. So you can type in your MSA and then you can choose from a number of different income categories on the left side of the screen and different timeframes to sort of get a quick look at where your middle census tracts may be, and then start to think more about what those mean in your community. Okay, so today we have amazing panelists that are like true. I doubt if there's anyone who's more expert on the topic than these three are, and a mix of policymakers and practitioners. So Jenny Gaynor is the director of shared equity housing at NeighborWorks America, and she came to NeighborWorks America from Grounded Solutions, which is, you know, a very well-known national organization that's really, I think, you know, led the charge in the latest generation of thinking about shared equity housing solutions. Leslie Ackerman is the Community Housing Trust Manager at Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services in Ithaca, New York, where I used to live, and was sort of, you know, it's a small enough town that I was really kind of aware of the change when the organization decided that, hey, we're going to have to start really worrying about affordability, and we're going to have to make some hard choices about how we do our housing work. And so she's going to be able to tell us all about that. And then Ashley Winans is the CEO at NeighborWorks Southern Colorado, which is in Pueblo. And Ashley has not only started to look at, you know, individual one-off sort of situations of doing shared equity housing, she's now started this really intriguing development of a huge parcel of land that's going to be shared equity sort of middle neighborhood built from scratch. And so she's going to talk to us about how she ever came up with that idea and how that's working out. So let's get started with Jenny. And I asked Jenny to sort of set the stage for us on, you know, what is the latest on shared equity housing strategies. I actually personally had not checked in on it that closely for about 10, 15 years, and it has evolved since I was paying attention. So let's switch over to Jenny and have her tell us what we should know about shared equity strategies today.
Hello, everyone. And I'm sorry, I had to leave and come back because my Zoom froze. So I think I need screen sharing privileges again.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I am Jenny Gaynor. I've been at NeighborWorks serving as Director of Shared Equity Housing just since this September. And prior to that, I spent about 10 years in a variety of capacity building roles, supporting shared equity housing programs at nonprofits and municipalities at Grounded Solutions. So as you all probably know, NeighborWorks America is a congressionally chartered and funded nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We provide communities with affordable housing, financial counseling and coaching, training, and resident engagement and collaboration support in areas of health, employment, education, et cetera. Throughout our network, we've got more than 240 member organizations in every state, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And I'm going to try again, and now I can share my screen. You didn't miss out on much. It was just this opening one. So Here we go. Looking good?
Looking great.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to do a super brief overview to start and then have a pop quiz that is not a pop quiz. So I'm going to start with just saying shared equity housing. It's really an umbrella term that we're using for models that are balancing the benefits of individual ownership with the community benefits of having land and housing that really remains affordable to your residents over time. And so the most common models that you may or may not have heard of yet include community land trusts, or CLTs, resident-owned communities, or ROCs, deed restricted units, which can be the biggest and broadest and most confusing language that we use, because sometimes they might be called below market rate or BMR units, depending on what state you're in. Others might call it permanently or long-term affordable homes, homes with lasting affordability. There's all kinds of things that could be going on within this category. And then finally, limited equity housing cooperatives, or LECs. And so now I'm going to ask, I think, Anne, can you start our poll? Awesome. So like I said, a pop quiz, that's not really a quiz. I'm just curious if you are familiar with these models without defining them or going much deeper or anything like that. Just want to know who's in this virtual room. And so I see these answers, they're flying in. You can give it another 30 seconds though if you're trying to decide where you fall in this spectrum. Okay. Things are starting to slow down. Maybe last chance to get your response in. Awesome. It looks like I can end the poll, so I'm going to take that privilege. And then just share the results out really briefly with everyone. So it looks like folks are generally in the middle. A couple of these models might be familiar to you, but I'm excited for the 25% of you who haven't really heard the term before. So that's what I'm here for. I'm really going to give a lot of the basics on these models and try to make sure you've got a little bit of grounding before you get into the really awesome projects that Leslie and Ashley are going to share. And so here we go. So some of the typical characteristics that we'd be looking at are resale restrictions that are going to keep your home affordable for the long term. So right, in pretty general terms, that means telling your homeowners that in exchange for lowering the purchase price, right, they're getting an affordable home, they're also going to sell it at a lower price down the road in order to pass that affordability benefit on to future homeowners, right? And shared equity models are really sharing some of these risks and rewards for homeowners, right? So homeowners might be sharing in the rewards with their future homeowners, like the future folks who will live in their homes, and with their community members by foregoing some of that appreciation if they purchased at market rate. But it also means that the homeowners have a steward, typically that nonprofit partner supporting them, or other cooperators who are really invested in their common success. So really, again, sharing risks and rewards, those risks and expenses of homeownership kind of over a broader pool instead of doing it alone. And you'll hear that I just said that word steward. A key difference between shared equity homeownership and that kind of standard DPA program you might be more familiar with is that you're going to have ongoing monitoring and a supportive relationship with that homeowner over time. It's not just provide the subsidy and kind of monitor for 5 years or 10 years and that's that. It's an ongoing relationship, and we typically call this stewardship in the shared equity world. And then finally, most shared equity models really do include strong community roles. And so that's often community governance or community control within governance or democratic control within the cooperative model. And so to go a little deeper on some of these models that you might have heard of just briefly, community land trusts are often the most commonly known model of shared equity housing. And community land trusts are nonprofit organizations, and their mission is to acquire land and steward it permanently to meet community needs. So a little different from the kind of preservation land trust you might be familiar with. The CLT model was really established back in the 1960s by civil rights movement leaders who were trying to establish ownership opportunities and community control for Black farmers in the South, trying to give that kind of economic control to folks who were faced with really challenging situations. And so as of right now, there are about 289 community land trusts in the US with about 12,000 homes. But just knowing, again, with this model, it can be broader than just home ownership. You're able to do whatever the community desires with that land use. But in the homeownership model in particular, the way it's structured with the CLT is that the CLT or that nonprofit will retain ownership of the land, and the homeowner will actually purchase the improvements only. And there's a ground lease that's tied to tying it all together and sharing those risks and rewards that we were talking about. And so then limited equity cooperatives and resident-owned communities, both of these are self-governing resident-owned cooperatives, right? So these have that democratic control element. And in a limited equity cooperative, right, shares are sold at an affordable price, typically to an income eligible buyer. There are about 300,000 of these nationwide. And I could see how this is not really the model that's as relevant in the middle neighborhood model or area, but they can be multifamily buildings, but it might be a neighborhood of duplexes. There's a lot of different applications here. But as you know, they are more common in places like New York City, Washington, D.C., et cetera. And so then resident-owned communities, right? Those are manufactured home communities where residents actually cooperatively own the property. And so right now there are 304 ROC communities, and that's 20,000 plus owners in 21 states. And so I think it's a real area of consideration when you're thinking about this work. If there are manufactured home communities within your service area, there can be kind of tucked in on the edges, but establishing community ownership through a ROC can be a real way to preserve affordability that lasts and really keep costs down and improve living conditions of people who might otherwise have investor landlords. And then finally, deed restricted homes, right? It's making a home affordable upfront to an income qualified buyer, but that deed restriction is going to have stipulations, that ensure that the home is sold at an affordable price to a future buyer, typically someone who will be income eligible. And so this is a model that's used by nonprofits and municipalities. It functions really similarly to the CLT homeownership model, but it's kind of a different kind of legal agreement that you're using to secure ongoing affordability. And deed restricted homes, again, could be anything. It could be that single family home, but even community land trusts can use it, use a deed restriction when they're using when they're developing a condominium or something like that. So it's pretty broadly used in the field.
Jenny, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't usually do this, but I did want to point out, especially for this audience, that shared equity housing models don't have to be big monolithic groups of housing. They can also be scattered site and mixed into your community. And I think that last model that you talked about is, in my mind, at least, it's more often the case that it's they can be scattered site, although I don't suppose there's anything technically about the tool. What do you think? Are any of these models more likely to be used for scattered site single family homes than for a whole sort of multifamily development or subdivision?
Yeah, I think that deed restrictions might be slightly more commonly used for scattered site, but there are plenty of folks using ground leases for scattered site development too. It might be a little bit more concentrated in a specific neighborhood in that case, but you can definitely be doing scattered site with both the deed restriction and with the CLT or the ground lease. I think that the cooperatives are a little bit less likely to be scattered site.
Thank you.
Yep. And so overall, the benefits for shared equity housing, right? It makes it easier for a family who otherwise wouldn't have access to home ownership to become a homeowner, build wealth and assets, and like you have stable housing payments and you get to build wealth that comes down from paying down your mortgage and sharing that appreciation, right? So really comparing shared equity homeownership to rental is really the comparison that is helpful in seeing that difference that shared equity homeownership can make in your community. The data shows that you're able to build assets through shared equity housing that you wouldn't be able to build in a rental situation. And this more attainable form of homeownership can help play a role in closing the racial wealth gap when you're pairing it with other systemic changes and investments, right? And so then secondly, it really does keep that housing affordable for future generations, right? And as Marcia pointed out, that's something that you can be seeing right now. You can invest now and make housing affordable, and that investment will protect that for the long term. It can help neighborhoods stay vibrant and diverse in ways that other down payment assistance kinds of plans aren't necessarily going to do. And so then the third point really is connected there. It's an opportunity to stabilize neighborhoods by preserving access to land and housing over time. And when you're combining this with strong resident-driven strategies, you can really preserve that character in a neighborhood that I think is so important when we're thinking about these middle neighborhoods. And you can be staving off gentrification and displacement if they are in that far off horizon. And so then I just want to share a little bit more about my work at NeighborWorks right now. Our initiative was initially funded in 2019. And as of this last federal budget, we've got about $12 million to support the exploration, implementation, scaling in the field, as well as building innovation, right? And we started with a scan of our network and the field, and we really saw that there was a wide range of interest, like people who are just like, I think maybe one of these models might be interesting. Can we do some research on our market and check in with our community members to see if it works, ranging all the way up to some of the leaders in the field being within the NeighborWorks network. And so we decided to try to play a role filling in some grants, technical assistance, training, tools and templates, and then some evaluation, in particular looking at resident health related outcomes. And so I thought this was helpful to show this slide where just so that you can think about where you might fit in this broad range within shared equity, because we saw, quite a few of you might be at learning and exploring, but then if you're journeying down this road, you might then work on feasibility, market capacity building assessments, and then planning and starting up if you're interested in exploring. And you might dip in and dip out. You might explore different models. There's a lot of ways to kind of dip your toe in. And again, I think Leslie and Ashley will have good stories that you can think about. And I will drop in a few of the resources that I mentioned that we've come out, which includes a report we just released this week on our first 3 years of the initiative, which again would have some good case studies that might be of interest. And so wrapping up my time, I just wanted to share a couple of keys for success that I thought were really relevant, again, with what Ashley and Leslie will share down the road, thinking about when is the right time to consider this kind of model, and then planning for success. Like you're considering it, but like, what do you need to know that's a few steps ahead? And so the first thing, knowing when the time is right, some of the common themes I've heard from organizations is that you're starting to feel like you need more subsidy for one household that makes you feel comfortable to make that home affordable, right? Like maybe you've even tried the kind of recapture model where someone's paying back the exact amount of subsidy when they sell off in the future, but that recapture amount isn't enough to subsidize a similar quality unit for a similar household the next time. If you're starting to run into that problem, that's a time that people really seem to feel like shared equity models might make sense. And similarly, if you're starting to see displacement or the potential for displacement and want to invest with more modest subsidies starting now, to think about that long-term guarantee to affordable ownership in your neighborhood or community. And then finally, we really do see some groups pursuing this work because of their beliefs. Resident control of land, democratic control of housing, it just feels right for them. And so sometimes that is the main driver behind exploring these models. And then stewardship is essential, right? Once you've decided that the time is right to pursue this work, some of my kind of tips that I've heard, right? Your legal agreement alone is not going to guarantee ongoing affordability. I think it's clear that I think these models are great, but they're not magic. It takes staff time to plan for ongoing monitoring and support for homeowners and cooperators. So you'll really want to plan for this from the start. And then many of you are likely experts in the pre and post-purchase housing counseling and education work. But remember that you'll need to do similar work with all of your partners, the lenders, the appraisers, real estate agents. They need to know and understand your program upfront and on an ongoing basis. So the sooner you start planning for that kind of work, the better, because there can be some real hurdles in that education and setting systems up. And then finally, I think being strategic is really important. Hopefully I've gotten you a little excited, but maybe a little scared. And there's great potential, but also a lot of work. So thinking about ways to partner and leverage others' experiences, whether it's in development, counseling, monitoring and support, all of these things are great opportunities to partner and leverage each other's expertise. And so I just want to thank you for that time. Pop out of the screen share.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear from Leslie and Ashley.
I was amazed to see the broad range of experience with shared equity models from your poll. That is really interesting, and it is really exciting, right? It's really, I feel like we're in this time of transition, and it's an opportunity for some real change, and that we're adapting to the market. So let's hear from the people who already started doing that. And I think we're going to start with Leslie from Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. So take it away, Leslie.
Let me unmute myself and get us into full screen. Do we look good? I'm going to assume that you can see my slide. Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Marcia and Jenny, and welcome to everybody. And I'm excited to be here. As Marcia said, I'm the Community Housing Trust Manager at Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. I hope that what I can share with you about our housing trust will be great food for thought and useful. So much of what Jenny talked about really resonated with our experience. So I hope I've got some useful info to share for you. INHS, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ithaca, Ithaca is a college town of about 50,000 people. It's pretty much smack in the middle of New York State, about halfway between New York City and Canada. And we're pretty much a quintessential middle neighborhood. There's not a lot of extreme poverty and there's not a lot of extreme wealth. I think everybody's pretty much in the middle. And it's been like that for quite a long time. So back when INHS got started in affordable home ownership, most of what we were doing was rehabs. At that time, it was a very different market than today, as it probably was in all of your communities. We could buy an old dilapidated house for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, put the same amount of money into it, and you'd have a great new house that we'd sell somewhere in the mid 5 figures. And that was a financial model that really worked. It didn't require a lot of subsidy. And when the house turned over, it wouldn't have appreciated all that much. So it was still affordable. So this worked for quite a while, up until the late 90s, and even into perhaps the very early aughts. Is that what we call them? You could still buy a home in Ithaca for the high end of 5 figures, under $100,000. That is not where we are today. And so that math of the old model is just not feasible. These days, $100,000 will get you a gem like this. That's around the corner for me, and it's a tear down, right? So $100,000 isn't going to get us or any of our home buyers, our mid to low to moderate income home buyers, anything. We've got development costs today that are so much higher than the selling price that it creates this funding gap that is, or seems to be, close to insurmountable recently. If it today costs us $400,000 or very nearly that to develop a single unit that we're going to sell for less than half that, we're talking about needing a subsidy of about $250,000 for a single unit. You can see there, this is a problem that's not just a problem for us, but this problem, even though the exact scale of the finances are different everywhere, this is the fundamental problem of affordable home ownership everywhere. There's very few areas, if any, in this country where any developer can build a house for less than they're going to sell it for. Did that make sense the way I expressed that math? Build the house for less than they're going to sell it for. Yeah, if they're going to sell it for an affordable price. So if you know, maybe somewhere it's not costing $400,000, it might be $300,000 or $200,000 even to develop a unit, but those aren't markets where you're going to be selling it for an affordable cost. Anyway, the math is just making it really tough. Plus, for us, the resale, because the cost of housing has gone up so much, if someone's reselling that house that we put a ton of subsidy into, it's no longer going to be affordable. We might be selling it for $150,000 and resale is now at market rate going to be $300,000, something along those lines. So we found ourselves in the early thousands, the early aughts, with these two big problems on our hands. We didn't want to put hundreds of thousands of dollars of subsidy into each unit and then have that go up in smoke when the house was turned over by the first owner and sold at market value. We wanted to be able to see subsidies going into lasting affordability so that we would create long-term assets for the communities. So we started noodling around, even back before the turn of the century, we were experimenting with some different kinds of deed restrictions. But in 2009, that coalesced into a program with more structure. We had too much going on with different kinds of deed restrictions, and some of them weren't really helping to establish permanent affordability, which is what we were going for. So we launched the Community Housing Trust in 2009, and since then, all of our for sale housing has been part of the CHT. I will note that our CHT is not exactly a standard community land trust that Jenny just described, and I'll explain why in just a second. Here is what it looks like. INHS owns the land. The home buyer purchases the house, the improvements, as they say in real estate speak, and we have a ground lease, which is the legal document that spells out the relationship, and it spells out the terms of the resale and establishes the permanent affordability. Now, the reason that our CHT is not a standard community land trust is because there isn't a separate entity that has that community control and manages the land trust itself. There is no separate land trust entity. INHS is the owner of the land, and our organization and our board directs all the activities of the housing trust. So in that sense, there isn't the community involvement in the governance of it, but in all other structural ways, the transactions and the ownership structure and the resale structure mimics that of land trusts. So how does it work on the homeowner end? The homeowners are buying the homes below market, way below market, typically these days, probably about 50% of market price. They get a special property tax assessment under the CHT that significantly reduces their property taxes. And because INHS holds ourselves to some really high standards in building the homes, all the homeowners have a really good quality, energy efficient house that's not going to cost them a ton to maintain and to operate. So a lot of financial benefits to the owners. Is there a trade-off? There is. The trade-off is that restricted resale value. The way our housing trust works is the homes in the CHT are limited to 2% appreciation per year. So that allows the homeowners to build equity, build some ownership wealth, not at market value for sure, but they do get to build some wealth in their homes. And that home is not going to appreciate so rapidly that it's going to become unaffordable when it's sold. I'll note also, Jenny made a comment about the benefit for homeowners in shared equity structures versus renting. And we did a side-by-side comparison a couple years ago because we had a member of our local common council who felt that it was better to rent than to own a CHT house because of the limited equity. And we did this side-by-side with a brand new townhouse of ours and a brand new apartment that was affordable or supposedly affordable. And in fact, the rent was significantly higher, even though it had been calculated to be affordable to under 80% AMI, that rent was more than the entire principal, interest, mortgage payment, taxes, the whole business that the homeowner was going to be paying. And our calculation was that at 5 years, if the homeowner sold after 5 years versus the renter leaving after 5 years, the homeowner would have been about $22,000 ahead of the renter. So that's a pretty significant difference. Now, just to give you a sense of the conditions that we have, so we can gauge, how much is this really benefiting homeowners? Does it fit our needs? The community of Ithaca has very few homes available. That median price there of about $300,000 might not look too shocking for those of you in really high rent districts in big, expensive urban areas, but relative to our median income, it's way out of reach. And I'll note that that median price is also including a lot of lower cost homes that are in more rural areas of the county and houses that aren't in great condition. So in the city of Ithaca itself, they're way above that number and probably closer to 400,000. If you got a single parent making $50,000, $55,000, that's what a teacher is going to be making in Ithaca. They're not going to be able to afford a $300,000 house. So in many cases for low income home buyers, the community housing trust houses that we're developing are the only affordable option. What makes it work? I mentioned the financial benefits to the homeowners. Here's what makes it work in the big picture. We're able to provide financing assistance at the time of purchase. That's in the form of a 0%, no interest, no payment due on sale mortgage that enables the home buyers to put down a bigger down payment, which means smaller mortgage. So that helps get them into the homes. The reduced tax assessment helps them stay in the homes. We saw in the early days, before we were able to get this reduced tax assessment passed, that the homes initially were taxed at the purchase price, but then subsequently were assessed at market, which is about double what the purchase price is. So if you picture a low-income home buyer whose taxes double the second year, that's a serious problem. Under the regulations now, the homes are assessed at their restricted resale value rather than at the market rate. So that's a huge, huge benefit that makes the ongoing housing affordable for that owner. And then finally, the appreciation cap, that limited, that restricted resale value, keeps the home affordable for the next buyer. One more thing about the restriction on that resale is, while that does limit the windfall that the homeowner is going to get when they sell the house, that reduced tax assessment makes up a big portion of it over the life of their ownership of the home, because that's thousands of dollars that they are saving each year. And that's money in hand now that they can spend, save, invest, whatever, rather than having to wait to benefit financially from the ownership of their home, not until after they sell the house. Here is where we are today. Even 13 years in, we're a relatively small operation. We don't have the capacity, staff, or financially to do some giant developments. And you'll hear from Ashley about a really big development they're doing. So totally different direction, but we're plugging away. We do about 5 to 10 homes a year. We've got a few that are in the process of being sold right now, and I'm working on developing 17 more. But what a lot of the focus of my job has been in the almost 4 years that I've been in this role has been figuring out big picture, what is this community housing trust trying to accomplish, and how can we do it strategically and sustainably? The financial question was the biggest piece of it, because even though that funding gap wasn't quite as extreme when I started, because that was just pre-pandemic, and we all know what the construction industry has done since the start of COVID, we could already see the writing on the walls. That funding gap, that difference between what it costs to develop a home and what we could sell it for, was already too big and getting bigger. And so we needed to figure out how we could make this workable without a constant internal subsidy from our organization. And we wanted to be more strategic rather than just, opportunistic and piecemeal. Hey, there's a house, let's buy it and rehab it, or piece of land, let's do something. I've also been exploring new models, including some of the other models that Jenny talked about, but also new ways of construction that could save us money, such as using modular construction and being our own in-house general contractor. And in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about some more of that if needed. But strategically, where we have found things going, and this is all good news for us, is that I think priorities are really shifting in a lot of ways in the whole affordable housing space, because a lot of funders and other agencies, governmental and private, have recognized that for many years, there's been a ton of money going into affordable rental housing, but affordable home ownership is where there's this giant hole, and it is where the opportunity for building wealth is. And so there's funding going in newly into home ownership, which has made a humongous difference for us. It's an opportunity for some of the injustices of the past to be righted. We all know that redlining and segregation and disinvestment from neighborhoods of color in particular have limited the opportunity for a lot of families to build generational wealth. So this is all changing. And in New York, we've had a couple of new funding sources that have put a lot of additional money in, and that's really changing our bottom line. And it's going to make it a lot more financially feasible for us to sustainably keep developing these homes. So to wrap up with just a couple of pictures, because I know everybody likes to see pictures, I think that one of my most important take-home messages is figuring out that math, figuring out what's going to work financially for your organization and for your community. Can you make the access into the house, the maintenance staying in the house, and the transfer to a future owner, can you make all of that financially feasible for the owners and for your organization in light of the resources you have and can get access to? And that stewardship that Jenny talked about is super important too. Do you have the staff power and the knowledge and the partnerships to make sure that the education and the oversight and the handholding, because this is a handholding process for sure, do you have that capacity? I will stop it there, and I am going to, let's see here, stop share and flip it back over to my colleagues.
Leslie, that was fascinating going through that math. There are several technical questions for you. in the chat. And if you want to answer some of them in the chat, feel free to do that. But we're going to still hold questions until the end so that we can, answer all of them, including those for Ashley. So let's go ahead and switch to Ashley and go from a small town kind of very gradual property at a time build up to boom, we're out west in the great frontier. We're just going to develop a whole town practically all at once. Ashley thinks really big. So Ashley Winans, again, CEO of NeighborWorks of Southern Colorado in Pueblo. Take it away, Ashley.
Thank you. I'm going to get my screen share up. All right, there we go. So for those who don't know, NeighborWorks Southern Colorado, we actually used to be NeighborWorks of Pueblo, and we lost NeighborWorks coverage up and down the Front Range. So we're about 100 miles south of Denver and about 100 miles from the border of New Mexico. So we're right smack dab in the middle of the south of Colorado, and we're right along the Front Range, and we no longer have NeighborWorks in the Springs. So we're lacking some coverage up and down the Front Range. So we actually took on that entire part of that territory. And it's been really good. But we want to partner our education services with our lending services and our construction services. So we've been building in Pueblo for 30 plus years, building on the west side for over 20 years. And the west side of Pueblo is sort of the last not developed area of town. And so it's where we can buy land because we're out in the west in town and still build. And we're a town of about 100,000. So just to give you a little bit of a background there. So like I said, we've been building on the west side for over 20 years. I've been with the organization for just under 10. We're able to build there, purchase, a decent amount of land. And so right now we've been building on average about 20 homes a year. We used to be able to get, a subsidy from the state or the city of about $20,000, and then Colorado Housing and Finance Authority had a program that got families about $15,000. And that was plenty of subsidy for what the building costs were to being able to make the home affordable. Kind of same as Leslie was saying, you didn't need a ton of subsidy to bridge that gap. But what we've seen in our housing market is that the prices and the values of homes have outpaced what incomes, how quickly incomes are rising. And so we see that gap right now today, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, what it costs to build and it'll appraise for versus what our lower income, even 80% AMI families can afford. And that larger gap in affordability made us really sit down. And this was back in 2018, 2019, just before COVID hit. And we saw this just exacerbated by the pandemic. But this creates a much larger affordability gap. And how can we bridge that gap and still create affordable homeownership? Very core to NeighborWorks Southern Colorado is that homeownership is really the best means towards stability for families and wealth growth. So to show you a little bit of the numbers in Pueblo, to just get an idea, we are a steel town. We have a big steel mill. That's where a lot of our labor force works and is employed. And so we are a little bit lower income than the rest of the state and the national group, but we're also in Colorado. And so we have incredibly high rents. I don't know, I imagine a lot of the United States faces those things. Colorado is pretty well known in the western part of the country as having really high rents and really high home values. Our HUD published FMR for Pueblo was $1,471, almost $1,500 for a 3-bedroom in monthly rent. Coupled with, we have extremely low inventory, about a 2.1% rental vacancy, and that's a year-old figure. It's probably worse now. where median income is only 53,430. So our median income is significantly lower than what people can afford for rents. 1471 is still high if that was a mortgage payment. So working within that. And then we have a pretty high poverty rate here. So in Pueblo, 18.4% of our families are living in poverty. So knowing that we had really low incomes, rents were going up, housing prices were going up, and the affordability gap was growing, we really sat down, and I liked what Jenny said about some of this, like, what's the right solution for you? And so we went through a pretty lengthy process where we said, okay, we want to build houses, we want to put people in homes and create home ownership opportunities. So what and who are we serving? So we looked at where the greatest need was. It was definitely our low-income families, our BIPOC population, and our disadvantaged community. We have a pretty high level of people needing ADA access as well here in Pueblo. Then, the question is, where is the opportunity? So we have extremely low inventory. It's very difficult to buy infill housing right now in Pueblo. We have about half of the inventory that we typically have had for the last 2 years. So we really were looking at land. We had been building on the west side, and about 2 blocks from the subdivision we just finished this year, there was 80 acres for sale. It was initially slated to be a gated community, and we were able to work with the owner and actually purchase that land from him. And he gave us a little bit of a discount as a nonprofit, so that was fantastic. We also looked at the things that we needed to provide within the subdivision. So this will be our 3rd subdivision that we've created in Pueblo. And so we really took a measure of what people were wanting. So we actually surveyed people on the west side. We did that as part of like different community meetings. And so connectivity, because the west side is one of the only places left to build, it's also the most disconnected. So we've got streets that stop and then start 2 blocks later. We have problems with, proper bridges to the rest of the city. So in Pueblo, we are on the Arkansas River, and then we have a train tracks that run north-south, and the 2 disconnect different parts of the city from being able to literally physically access other parts of the city. So we knew we needed connectivity. We wanted to bring in public transportation because those streets start and stop. A bus can't go through there. And then access to critical services while keeping, a variety of affordable housing solutions. When is it needed? Now. I think we can all agree we need affordable housing now and faster. The Colorado Health Foundation, which is on a slide later that I addressed, that they've come in and helped us, but they added housing to one of their priorities in 2018. And because of that, they were super on board with jumping on getting something like this done now. It has been a little bit of a learning curve for the Health Foundation because housing is a little more complicated than they had anticipated. They thought they could kind of throw money into it and it would be done immediately, but it's been a good process. And so how can we create safe, healthy, affordable community that provides wealth building opportunities, and where do we get the funding to do it? So for us, was all about finding the right solution. So our land that we purchased lies in an opportunity zone, which opens up funding opportunities. It's also located in a food desert, so we wanted to address that, particularly because this isn't just this community, but we have other neighborhoods that we have worked in or built homes for over the last years. On the west side, this particular area identifies as 67.4% BIPOC, 24.4% live with disabilities, so they need a lot of accessibility. 32% live below the poverty level, even though this is identified as a middle income area, a middle neighborhood. The home ownership rate is low, so we knew we wanted to address homeowners. We have, cost burden homeowners. I don't want to read all of these numbers to you, but you kind of get the idea. This area hit all of the things that we said we wanted to target as part of our solution to affordable housing creation. So then we looked at how can we create affordable housing solutions, knowing that the gap is so large. And it felt like it would be irresponsible of us to create housing that needed $75,000 or $100,000 in subsidy and then lose that affordability when the first homeowner sold. We've done that in our other subdivisions where I said, we did $20,000 or $15,000 worth of subsidy. And just in the last subdivision we've finished, we've got homeowners selling homes and they're getting $100,000 worth of equity out, which is fantastic for that one homeowner, but we just lost a unit that was affordable. And it felt like we were not building as fast as we were losing affordable units. So we went through a long process and decided on a shared equity model through deed restrictions. We felt more comfortable with that than a land trust, a CLT. And that was a decision that was made by our board and a group of committed partners that really looked at what would be the most digestible for our market. It allows families to generate wealth and assist in shrinking the wealth gap. And right now, these are sort of the funding sources we have tapped. So the Colorado Health Foundation came in with about $4 million, $1.5 million for master planning and engineering the subdivision, $1 million in sort of initial startup down payment assistance, and $1.5 million in different grant funds for capacity building, because as Jenny said, it's not easy. There was a lot of time dedicated to the capacity building we needed to do as an organization to be able to create shared equity. And through that, developing a deed restriction and the attorneys and all of the things that went with that. We've used the Department of Housing and Urban Development and different coalitions that we participate in. The Department of Local Affairs, that's Colorado, Federal Home Loan Bank, the Metro District, and City of Pueblo. So we developed a Metro District. I'll show you what that looks like, to maintain all of the public spaces for our subdivision. And then also, I think it's really huge to note that the Department of Local Affairs is looking at funding this at a minimum of $50,000 per homeownership unit that we develop. And that is because in the state of Colorado, there's a couple of different coalitions that have worked really hard to push through some bills at the state level that add significantly to homeownership and affordable housing as being one of the really dedicated things that our money goes to. So this is Pikes Peak Park. This is the 80 acres master planned that we purchased on the east side. We intend it to be a catalyst for investment and connectivity for the west side of Pueblo. It will be a healthy, walkable neighborhood and bring public transportation, retail space, community buildings, and provide access to childcare, healthcare services, food access, and creative, affordable homeownership opportunities. There is an entire mix here of all different types of homes, and about 10 acres of green space. So this kind of explains what we've master planned. We've worked with the city of Pueblo. So if you look down here, there's the Fire Station 11. We actually deeded over about 2 acres of land to the city after we subdivided with a contract for them to build a fire station there, which will serve our entire neighborhood as well as the west side. We have an elevated area, which we intend to have a big park there. And hopefully that helps to preserve our view of the mountains in the subdivision, should there be building in the around the subdivision in the future that could block those views. That's a big deal in Colorado. You got to be able to see the mountains. We have urban gardens planned. We've been working with we have a citywide initiative that installs urban gardens throughout our community and maintains them. We have a linear park on the eastern space that leads into, if you see where that squiggly section is, that's all detention for these 604 units. We have green courts planned. That's a new type of building that we have seen becoming really popular in Colorado and throughout the country, where the homes actually face a green court and are loaded through private lanes. And that actually reduces our horizontal infrastructure costs, because the private lanes that we build don't have to be quite as engineered as the public roads. And so as they're offloaded on these private lanes, I've reduced the infrastructure cost by about $5,000 per lot. And then we have a big commercial space, which is named Sun Mountain. That is what the native tribes called Pikes Peak, which is what the subdivision is named after, because it was the first peak that the sun would hit. And in that commercial space, we have planned 10 commercial units, which we intend to find commercial uses that are going to be healthy for our neighborhood. So 2 community spaces, 15 plus acres of parks and green space, urban gardens. So we are trying to build this whole subdivision with shared equity in mind. And so we're going to share equity with the homeowners in the subdivision through deed restrictions. And they say it's a really big vision, but we feel like it's really, really necessary, and it creates an opportunity for us to build housing that will benefit the home buyers, the community, and the organization, and lasting affordability. So that this is something that will create opportunity for generations to come. For the home buyers, there's wealth building. So through the deed restriction, it's limited equity. We have a full model where the homeowner essentially, when they sign into the contract, earns 25% of any appreciated equity in the home using an appraisal model. And then the organization earns 75% of that equity, and we turn that around and find another qualified home buyer that is also income limited. And so that subsidy continues to grow as homes continue to appreciate. And that's sort of the most important thing, because we're going to need more money for subsidy in 20 years than we would need today. We believe that it enhances emotional well-being. It's been a proven component that improves children's education. When children have to move month after month, that sets them back about 6 months every time they move. So getting people into home ownership and getting them into a home that is sustainable and stable is really one of the things that's most important to us on the home buyer side. For the community, it creates jobs, it creates workforce, and a lot of economic growth for that particular area of town. And for the organization, it creates some self-sustainability. This is a project that we're going to work on that creates an opportunity for us in the long term. So this is about a 10-year project, and it'll help sustain the organization. It's an earned income opportunity for us. And because we're sharing the equity and it's appreciating, increases our balance sheet, which allows us to do more and be more effective in the community that we serve. So I know that was a lot, and I didn't focus on the numbers as much as Leslie did, which I did appreciate from that perspective. But that's my presentation. If you have any questions, just, yeah.
Ashley, that was fantastic. It's really, really interesting. And it's funny about the scale question, because 600 units can sound like a lot, but it's also, I bet it's a drop in the bucket in its own way, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to say, I really appreciate your organization having the leadership to recognize an opportunity in your market to stretch on scale more than most nonprofits have the ability to do for a variety of reasons, and to sort of start to test that concept and make it seem more possible, for others to do, or other, more philanthropy to invest in, so that we can all get bigger. That's really, really interesting. I'm going to pop out a question here for both Leslie and Ashley. What's been your experience in terms of the potential home buyers being interested in this model? And did it take a while to get people used to the idea or not? Do you have any reservations, Ashley, about getting 600 buyers to be willing to go for this limited equity?
Not as much as you would think. We did do, sort of an education tour, and we'll continue to do that. But we have a pipeline already of buyers who are waiting for us to finish homes. We're in a very low income area, and so people can't buy homes otherwise, right? Like, we have our own CDFI that does lending, and we're turning a lot of people away because there's nothing on the market for them where they're at. And so I think Leslie is spot on. It's compared to rentals, not compared to traditional home ownership. And they were never going to get into traditional home ownership otherwise. So this is sort of that pathway.
Mm-hmm. How's it been for you, Leslie?
Yeah, I think that in our case, with our market the way it is, it's typically true that someone in that under 80% AMI, or frankly under 100% AMI today, income level, can't afford anything other than perhaps something that's in really distressed condition and or way outside of any residential area, a town, a city where their work is, where their kids are going to school, and where services and retail and so forth are. So they don't have a lot of other options, but we want them to understand what they're getting into. So we put together an explainer, here's how this works, right? We've got a little class, a little online tutorial that they take to learn about the trade-offs, and we're honest about it. And what we want people to understand is that you as a potential home buyer need to understand what you're after. And if your top priority is to make as much profit as you can when you sell the house, the CHT is not a good fit for you. But if you're looking for a safe, efficient, comfortable home that's going to be yours, that is going to have the stability that comes with ownership rather than being at the mercy of a landlord, then the CHT might be a great opportunity and a good fit for your needs. And something that we found is that some of our homeowners tell us, I'm not worried about what happens when I sell the house. I'm worried about right now and where I'm going to raise my kids for the next 10 years or 15 years or whatever. And I bought this new home, and actually I'm paying less than I was in rent, and it's mine. So just that right there is a benefit that they see. But we don't want to present it as a solution for everybody, because people do have different objectives in home ownership.
That's a very well stated. That's a really interesting way to approach it. Some of you, the people on this, the presenters here know that I actually encountered in a class I taught at the Institute, one of Ashley's staff who was talking about this. And I was like, so, assuming that there was going to be like, wow, you're going to convince 600 people to go for this model show? Yeah, no problem. So I'm like, I'm really getting on board with this, especially in markets where, that things have changed so much. And it really doesn't take more than having people start to look for a house in their price range for them to come right up against the reality, right? Okay, so a couple of other questions. Just an easy one, Ashley, any schools in your development, or what's your education component?
Yep, there's no schools in our development, but there's a school at the end of the development that I was talking about that's 2 blocks away. And that is a K through 12 charter school. There's also some public schools in the area, but that K through 12 is pretty much a feeder for this. And the city has committed to actually putting the roadway through that would connect that school to our subdivision.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. Let's see, we have a question about, John Lehner asking about the reduced size streets that you're going to have in your development, and like who's responsible for cleaning and maintaining them, and how's that happen?
So that is the responsibility of the Metro District, which is why we formed a Metro District. So that will be run through property taxes. So there'll be a little bit of a property tax increase. But because we do an appraisal-based sale for the shared equity, like mortgage insurance will be gone on all of these properties for their mortgage. So we did the math to make sure that even with the taxes for the Metro District to maintain all these community spaces and narrow streets, they're still going to be paying less in mortgage than what they would be paying for a traditional.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't even thought about mortgage insurance. I'm not sure I can even wrap my brain around that question in the moment.
Right. Most of our low-income buyers have to pay mortgage insurance because they can't split the down payment. So it costs more money to be poor.
And who is doing the first mortgages on these? And I bet, Jenny, that's something that you know all about. So who does first mortgages, and how hard do you have to persuade them to do it? And can they sell them on the secondary market?
I was gonna let Ashley and Leslie share who their lenders are.
Okay.
I think you guys go first and then I can talk big picture.
So go ahead, Leslie.
Sure,
Yeah.
I'll jump in. Most of we have, being a relatively small community, we have a number of local institutions, a couple of credit unions, and some local banks that have become fairly familiar over the last 15 years with the housing trust model. And we also locally have a Habitat for Humanity affiliate that has a couple of housing trust homes. So we and they have made the local lenders pretty familiar with the housing trust model. So at the beginning, it was a little bit strange, what is this thing? How does this weird animal work? But they're all pretty familiar with it now. And we do find that pretty much all of our buyers are going to them. They're not going to the Wells Fargo and the Bank of America and the Citibank. They're going to Alternatives Federal Credit Union and CFCU, one of the other local credit unions, and so forth, because they know they've got community-oriented financing there that's familiar with the land trust model.
And do they just hold those first mortgages in portfolio?
I think that most of them do. They all, of course, have different lending policies and different activities they do with their portfolios, but I think because of the structure of it, they're probably holding them.
Okay. Ashley, how about your situation?
So that was always our concern too, is that where are you going to find somebody who can hold 600 notes? So we, in developing the deed restriction, went through a process with Grounded Solutions. Jenny's pretty familiar with, she's worked with us quite a bit, but in getting that deed restriction accepted through Fannie and Freddie so that the mortgage loans can be sold on the secondary market.
Good job, all of you. That's fantastic. So do they like have some kind of designated program at Fannie and Freddie? And do you have to meet certain guidelines and all of that?
Yes. So we're listed now as accepted through the duty of care. Is that correct, Jenny?
Duty to serve. Yeah.
Duty to serve. Sorry. Yeah. Duty to serve for that particular reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very exciting to know. Okay.
I'll say
sure,
just one
please.
big picture element to it. So generally a lot of people had early success with like local banks and portfolio products, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do have in their duty to serve rule, shared equity is actually written in as one of the underserved markets. And so they are doing work to make mortgages more accessible. And so I'll drop links to Grounded Solutions. There's a model ground lease and there's the model deed restriction that Ashley just mentioned. And it's like, if you start there, you have an in, right? Like it is a way to talk about it and build that familiarity. And then as Ashley said, there's also now a certification program on the Fannie Mae side. And so if you get your program on that list, there's like, hopefully things are working together and lenders will understand this is a known entity, like this is a thing you're doing that is good for buyers. And that should help with mortgage access. So I'll drop links for all of those things.
Fantastic. And I assume they must get to some CRA credit for those kinds of loans too. Okay, another question about tax mechanisms. What's Colorado's policy on taxation for affordable developments? In New York, we're home rule and very much struggling to overcome local resistance to adopting tax relief that would be necessary to make this kind of project possible, aside from Ithaca, of course. I don't know where Elka's from, but maybe she means she's in the city.
So we don't have anything for affordable developments yet. That's something that we have been working on. We do have some caps on our elderly families as far as what tax, at the point where they hit a certain age in home ownership, that increase can't happen annually any longer. The other thing is our taxes are a lot less than what New York's are to begin with.
Yeah.
So our property taxes on our units will probably be about $800 a year. Yeah. And that's at appraised value. So I mean, getting some relief would be great, but it's not going to make the difference that it does.
It is, yeah, you really have to think about where I was hoping we'd get to be able to make that point that when I left New York State, now I live in Arizona, my property taxes for a year are equal to what they were for a month in New York State. So.
Wow. See, it didn't even occur to me that there are places where property taxes don't break your back. It's amazing. Our taxes in the city of Ithaca, we pay about $35 per thousand, which means that you're paying $3,500 a year on $100,000 house, and there are no $100,000 houses anymore. So it's many hundreds of dollars a month. And even an extra $100 a month can be the difference for a low-income family between qualifying and not qualifying for a mortgage.
Yeah. Now, I will say, our educational system in Arizona is like disastrously underfunded. So there's that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole tax thing is just a big, giant monster that everybody has to keep chipping away at, it sounds like. Have your city governments supported these models or been troubled by it, because of the tax base issue?
Yes.
Ashley, do you want to jump?
Sure. They have supported shared equity, and they're actually coming in with about $2 million to put in that main road, that Sun Mountain. They've applied for and received a grant from the state to be able to do that. So they've been very supportive on that side of it. However, in developing a development like this that's so different than the houses that were built in the early 1900s and the 1950s and the subdivisions that are there, that has been a little bit more difficult. Getting folks to understand that smaller lots means that we can build more effectively and it's less expensive, and sort of pushing some of that through has been a little bit of a lift. It's taken us about a year to get, the PUD passed, all of the platting, getting the Metro District established, just in working with the city so that they can understand that in building this way, which they're doing all over the state, but our town is so far from where some of this other development is, they don't see it, is that this could be really a mechanism to be able to build a lot more affordable housing.
Good. Yeah, so it's an educational process like everything else. Nell asked a question about property maintenance and future renovations. So, you're talking in most cases about new construction, or I know INHS, I'm familiar with their rehab and it's absolutely top notch. You may as well have a new house. So that's one situation. And then, down the road when the property is ready to be sold, do you have any qualms about what kind of condition it will be in when it's time for resale, or the capacity, I guess, of your home buyers to do good property maintenance?
I'll jump in on that one. It's a question that we've been contemplating. You know, we've had the Housing Trust now for 13 years or so, and we have seen homes turn over, but they've been all still pretty new and in good condition. And at some point, whether it's in another 5 years or 25 years, someone's going to be reselling a housing trust that's going to have deferred maintenance on it. Our promise, so to speak, at least our internal ethics about the condition of our housing trust homes, is that the new buyer should be in a situation where they're not going to be needing to do any major system overhauls or anything except normal ongoing maintenance for at least 10 or 15 years. And so, you know, in another 10 or 15 years, we're going to be seeing homes that are going to need new roofs or new boilers or new, you know, whatever the system might be. We're not there yet. And we don't have a definitive answer for that. But what we want to figure out how to do is to work some additional funding, you know, not down payment assistance, but purchase funding into the financing package for the resale buyer, to make that affordable. And we'll see what that looks like. Thankfully, at this point, the houses are still all in good condition, but you know, houses age and they do require maintenance. So, but one of the things that we're looking at now is an opt-in, and NeighborWorks provided us with a grant to look at developing an opt-in program, which would be a way for an existing homeowner to become part of the housing trust, and potentially a benefit to them would be a significant investment in their home for maintenance. The trick is that a homeowner who wants to get that benefit usually has a huge amount of maintenance that's needed. And so we've looked at a couple of potential opt-in homeowners who need, you know, $80,000 or $100,000 or $120,000 worth of deferred maintenance to be covered. So that one's been something that we haven't quite figured out how to make the math work on that one yet. We'll see. That'll be a future webinar.
Almost the same, Leslie, almost the same. Yeah. But we do have a clause within the deed restriction that any improvements that need to be done that are more than 5% of the value of the home, that they work with us on. So if it is some of those things, we hope to have some programming in place at that point in time. But it is the homeowner's responsibility too. So what that looks like, we're still trying to figure out. As a CDFI, we do have our own rehab lending program, and some of that is forgivable. So if anything in the short term comes up, that's sort of our intention to put that in. Yeah, but we also we follow up with them on a regular basis, so nothing should be a surprise.
That's right. That's a very good point. And again, I'm more familiar with INHS, but they have a long, very experienced rehab loan program, and you know, grants for people that can't afford loan repayments. So I'm guessing that both of your organizations just have a lot of sort of comfort on the rehab side of affordable housing. So, you know, you're going to probably figure something out. And it's important. It's a really great question.
If I just chime in, that those model legal documents, the commentary that goes with them is long and boring, but a great resource for thinking through challenges like this, because there's some strategies, including like funding a maintenance reserve that goes with the unit if it's going to be a particular concern based on the housing stock in your area. So lots of ways to address it, and some good resources in a very long, boring document. So worth a seek, a find change to try to find it.
I totally get it. Yeah. I mean, if you want, the more serious you get about this stuff, the more you need to read the fine print, right? And I think we'll wrap up with that question for each of you. You know, if you really want to start seriously learning more and more about shared equity models and immerse yourself in sort of what I think of as almost a parallel universe to, you know, the standard, simple deed homeownership world, how can people start? What's a next step? there's Training Institute. I guess I'll toss out, I bet you have classes at the NeighborWorks Training Institute, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, even coming up at the VTI, there are 2 webinars, including one that is really just the basic, like, it's a webinar thinking about different forms of ownership. So that's a great place to look. I think that some of the links I dropped in with the like model comparison document can be really helpful. And I will just keep giving a plug for Grounded Solutions Network. They are really like the leaders in this field. They have all of those technical documents, and they also provide training. So I think those are great, like, places to start, like webinars that are bite-sized, like more depth tools to have conversations on your own. And those are great places to start.
So everybody should get on Grounded Solutions mailing list. I just put them, whoops, I didn't put it in the, so let me say that. Okay, it's an organization. It's called Grounded Solutions. So go ahead. What would you say, Leslie and Ashley, about potential next steps for people who want to really start exploring this more?
So I come from a small business development background originally, prior to my life in affordable housing. And so my suggestion would be, do a little bit of business planning. Think about this as if you're starting a new enterprise. What are your objectives? You know, like, spell those out really concretely. What are you trying to do, to accomplish? And is that actually meeting a felt need? You know, you definitely want to talk to other agencies and organizations at various levels to get their take on what's needed, and think about the resources that it's going to require. Just as if you were starting a business, you know, you need equipment, you need furniture. Do you need a storefront? In this case, you need some land, you need some funding, you need some construction planning, you need some oversight. Where are those capacities going to come from? Who's going to run it? So there's a lot of thinking and analysis. And I think, as Jenny suggested, a lot of the courses that are available can walk you through that, but start by exploring, you know, what the other potential partners in your community really feel like is needed. And of course, talking to the folks on the ground, the actual homeowners and the folks who are working with them already.
So 100%, I agree with Leslie. As I kind of tried to show within my PowerPoint, we decided to adopt shared equity and then find the right way to go about it, due to the fact that we wanted to serve the community by creating affordable housing and homeownership opportunities. So the need wasn't within our mission, and shared equity was the means to accomplish that. And then we explored how shared equity could work that way and work for us in the community that we're serving. And then, you know, Jenny, I'll plug Grounded Solutions as well, because they were a serious partner in our process. We were able to get some funding in, you know, hire them not just as, you know, partners, thought partners, but as actual consultants to this process. So if you find that you really do want to go down that road, that's definitely one of the best resources for technical assistance that's out there.
That's great. Yeah, I always suggest to people that you poke around in your own region or state too, and see who's like you, who's really interested in this and is maybe a little bit ahead of you or could partner with you or whatever the case may be. So start to build your coalitions and, you know, your other peer group around promoting this. I'm sorry that we have to wrap up. Actually, I'll just conclude, but hope that Ashley can stick around to answer this last question that popped up. So don't, yeah, we are going to send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this. It'll have the slide decks, the link to the recording, all of the resource links that people mentioned in the chat. Possibly, we'll try and just skim everything out of the chat because the actual chat document is kind of messy to look at. And we'll also try, Leslie, people would really like to see that comparison analysis you did between rental and one of your units. And so before people start to leave, we'd love for you to join our community of practice. You can do it by going to middleneighborhoods.org. And at the bottom of any web page, you can sign up either to only get our newsletter or to get our newsletter and be in our community of practice. We'd really love to have you. We always like to promote one of our partners, the Center for Community Progress, who has a lot of great webinars. They call it their Cornerstone Webinar Series. And thank you for joining us. And we'll ask you to, answer a couple of questions in the closing. So if Ashley's willing to stick around, can you talk about the value proposition for the Health Foundation and how it was that they, it sounds like they're totally bought into the social determinants of health, right?
They are. I think so. They had gone through what the social determinants of health are as a board and decided to add housing in. So this is before NeighborWorks was involved. Because as a health foundation, they're not very out there in the community, or they hadn't been. They were very focused on the health community and that being it. And when they added housing in, it really opened the door for us to really further that conversation. So yes, it's when people are in healthy homes, they have better health outcomes, but it really came into like, they need to have access to food, and we have food deserts in Pueblo, and really painting that for them, the picture of like, when somebody has to go to the grocery store and you're in a food desert, you have to take the bus or 2 buses, and it takes 2 hours, and the buses stop at 6 p.m. And if mom has to work from, we really had to paint the full picture of what the reality was for families when they didn't live near things that would create better health outcomes. So that's been a process in and of itself for us to figure out how to communicate in a way, because we know that healthy homes create better health outcomes. And we know that, and we say that, and for especially the health community, most of the folks who are on like a board for the Health Foundation are doctors. And so they're not seeing that every day. And so it's really painting that more thorough picture of what our families are going through. And that's why they have bad health outcomes, to be able to show that this is the right course or the right thing to invest in.
Leslie, are there
so
any health
interesting
partners? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, excuse me, we have a local coalition between the city of Ithaca and the county of Tompkins and Cornell University, who are the 3 founding partners in the Tompkins County Community Housing Development Fund. So it was a local fund where those 3 entities started by seeding it with some money to help fund affordable housing. And that's been a reliable source for some of our CHT developments. And they've since gotten I think the town of Dryden and maybe 1 or 2 other small players has joined it. And there's been some discussion for a while about getting our local hospital, the Cayuga Health Center, to become part of that and to be a contributor, because not only are they one of the major employers in the area, as is Cornell, but they've got a lot of stock, both, literal financial investment and ethical investment in the health of the community. And so they could really be contributing to it. They also, as a healthcare employer, have a ton of employees who are in that low mod income realm and can't afford to buy housing. So your comments made me think, wow, we should really be pushing on them more to be part of this. And so I guess the message for the whole audience, I see we've still got more than half of our audience still here listening, working on getting larger institutions in your community to pool funds into a local fund for the support, even if you're talking about just a couple homes a year. One of the great things there is it's community controlled, even if it sounds like, okay, the city and the big institutions are going to be the ones making the decisions. Yes, but it's not like HUD.
Right.
For all that HUD puts a lot of money into our projects and we appreciate them very much, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of rules behind that. Whereas a local funding body can say, here's how not complicated we want to make our application and our reporting process. And that's wonderful because they can really tailor it to meet local needs. And if the local needs are health related or education related or a particular neighborhood related, they can say, we want our money to go there. So I think that's a really important conversation to start having earlier. Do we have funding sources locally? And how can we get our big institutions to support this? Put your money where your mouth is, folks. Like, really.
Yeah.
Especially if you have
Leslie,
a university, because universities get huge tax breaks, right? You're not paying property taxes, guys. Put your money to this a different way.
I love that. To that point, you know how incredible it was not to have to go out to bid to 8 different places to find an architect and an engineer because we had Health Foundation money that I didn't have those requirements on.
Yep.
You have to make sure they had Section 3. I was able to find somebody who shared our vision and partner with them without all of the complicated components to it, which was great. And can you imagine how powerful and how much we could accomplish if, you know, industry powerhouses like housing and health came together? Like
and education.
There you go.
Yeah, I drafted my colleague's toolkit on building a health partner investment strategy. Our team at NeighborWorks has been working on this, and really, like, I think this toolkit is an incredible way of reframing how you think about those partnerships and your work. So it is in progress everywhere, and if you're just starting, this could be a great tool.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. Because I'm a consultant, I'm a little bit more, I respond, or my experience depends on what clients I have. But I did stumble into working on a project with a regional health foundation. I could not believe how invested they were in the social determinants of health and how badly they wanted to learn about and invest in housing and neighborhood revitalization overall, because they got it, they were totally bought into it, and the amount of money they had blew my mind. So it's a whole different scale of investment potential. I think that we could be tapping into, and I know that others like NeighborWorks America have really been looking at this. So I'm excited to read that guide as well, Jenny. Okay, we probably should wrap it up. Thank you so much, you guys. I never had any doubt that this would be very interesting to our audience and there'd be a lot of questions. I think the time, I should say that I was going to say the time has come, but the time's been around for a long time. And I think every few years we can, re-examine this question and add a few more people to who's actually trying to do permanently affordable housing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out over the next 10 years. I think it's a great opportunity. Thanks for your leadership, each and every one of you, and we appreciate your time.
Well,
thanks
everybody for coordinating this.
Yes.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.